Good morning again. Thank you for bearing with us. Unfortunately, we could not control the rain, but hopefully the picture will turn out well. There were, of course, about 30 of them taken, so we have a good chance, right? This morning, I'd just like to give you just a couple of quick housekeeping type items. I don't know how many of you are leaving right after the meeting ends, but if you're not and you are interested in a tour, and we're going to try to get you onto the house floor, not the house floor, but up in the, trying to blank on the word, in the house gallery. We are actually scheduled to vote somewhere around 1:30 to 2:30. So if you are interested, there is a sign-up sheet on the table here. Please sign up. Our plan is to have someone meet us here and take you upstairs on the tour. They'll tour the Capitol as well, but you will end up in the house gallery. So if you're interested, please sign up. Hopefully, we're on day 3 now, so hopefully I think we've had 2 very good days of discussions and interactions. And this morning, our session is taking ICT and Parliament to the next level, and Flavio is going to entertain us for a little while. Flavio?
Thank you very much. I don't know if entertainment is a compliment or whatever, but better make people laugh than cry, honestly. So, good morning. As you can see, my presentation is what level should we take ICT in Parliament. From the annotated agenda that was actually distributed, as you can see, the intention was, the emphasis was that some Parliament had great progress. What was not said was that many other didn't make any progress or not such great progress. There was also an emphasis on evolving technology that rapidly evolve, and there was probably what we can call a hint of what could be a way to address the 2 issues above, that some Parliament only and not all Parliament, and the rapid evolution of technologies that provide challenges for Parliament. I've been thinking if really what was a bit suggested in the agenda, that more and faster tools are really a way to address and the issue that was that we all know that there are relatively few Parliament making use of XML. That what I call a relatively local use of semantic technology in a context that is instead global and does require exchange of information and reference of information from each other, and the relatively paucity of tools or lack of tools. So the question that from my point of view is a bit, I have to admit, a rhetorical question, but for you, that you may disagree with me, it could be a real question, is more and faster the level that you want to deliver, or could be a way to deliver a wider and better use of XML that maybe we should explore? I think that what I will try to make the case in my presentation is that the next level could mean a different use of ICT, or a different approach to what we have been doing, and specifically in the context of XML in Parliament, a new level of what we could do with semantic technologies and with software application. So I will try to explore what option could lead us to wider and better use of XML. Because in my view, more and faster wouldn't really be the next level, but will be just a faster same level. So semantic technologies, what could be the next level? I begin with a quote that of Tim Berners-Lee that probably all of you know and that has been abused most likely. But if really the issue is go beyond the publication of document, if the issue is to really move for a web or relationship among document and concept, and that if you think in terms of a corpora of legislation, that's what we are talking about. Even here in the US, you have state legislation, you have federal legislation, and there is a lot of interrelationship in the two, among them. So if that is the issue, to move away from collection of documents, that is actually the e-paper paradigm, keep using computer are basically printing machine, that instead of printing on paper, they print on screen, on website. If that is the issue, if what is required is, and here is a little bit a reformulation of what they're called the 4 principles of linked data or whatever, so that we need to name objects and resources unambiguously, make use of structural web, make it easy to discover information about name, objective, or resources, and so on. If that is the object, if the level that we want to reach is that, as a common standard is the common standard that describe and relate parliamentary legislative document is the answer. There is no, that I see, but maybe there are answers that I see, but there is no easier, even if common standard is maybe a complicated process, but easier response to address that issue, to have real information that are linked and are discoverable easily and across organization and not just within organization. That is a common standard that maybe even later in the next presentation, Fabio will explain, I think, a bit, that doesn't really limit your own freedom to describe the document the way you want, to meet your own requirement, to fulfill your own expectation. At times I make an example that, for instance, we use it's not true the same mobile phone standard, because there are some of them, but phones support all of them. But we don't have the same conversation. So the fact that we use, or even if we take the example of, I'm sorry, I have to use a brand name, the Lego, the Lego bricks, the construction bricks, whatever. Each of us can definitely build a different house, but we are using common building blocks, and in the case of information system, this is something that can be very, very useful, and very useful having a common standard also because not only it will help to deliver better services to document, really open service, open and global services, but also because it will make the adoption of XML less challenging, less expensive, and more supported. That is what's happening when you use a standard. The new parliament will find the adoption of it, all of these 3 things together. A private company will find very hard to invest for to develop tools for a standard or a schema that only one institution is using. A different case will be when it is a standard and many institutions use it. So a common standard will not deliver only better service, but will make the adoption of XML less challenging, less expensive, and more supported. So as I wrote here, it would create a better ecosystem for both civil society and private sector to better support all parliament and not just some parliament. You will find several times in the slide this all parliament and not just some parliament, because it has always also been the theme of our project to promote the use of ICT in a way that is more likely, not necessarily, there is nothing sure in life or very few things, but is more likely to be sustainable and to provide the same very high quality services to all parliament, not just to some, small or big, resource rich or not so resource rich. So the next level for the one next level is common standard. The other next level is what could be the next level in software application. Of course, you know, we all wish for smarter application, better application. That, for instance, in the case of the XML, you know, like kind of magic application that you run through the debate record and will magically mark up everything that is relevant and so on and so forth, and that may happen in the future, but it is a level of innovation that we don't have much control or much contribution. What I wanted to bring your attention here is what I think is a kind of unique feature that software application have, feature that more and more people realize that it is something that has to be used, but and that are unique because there are no many goods, as I would say, that have this kind of set of feature. So a very low marginal cost. In the sense that once you have done an application, it doesn't cost really so much to duplicate it. Of course, the cost of deployment is another issue. We all know that. Another peculiarity is that the more people use a technology, it doesn't get wear off, actually. It is likely to get better because you get feedback from more people. You get more user cases. So the fact that you develop an application, for instance, and then you open source it and you let other people, organizations to use it is not just an act of generosity, but it will be better for you because you can be sure that somebody will find some issue or somebody will come up with some suggestion that then you can further include in your application. So it is also known that, you know, software applications are software to customize than hardware goods, and that is true. It's not painless, but it is relatively easier. And then they can scale up quite rapidly and dramatically when and if you put them online. With very little marginal cost, and then they use well anywhere and anytime. So, in my view, and of course here you're all free to disagree, the next level is open source, and for sure it is open source, when in our context, in the context of our project, we really wanted to support all parliament and not just some. And we really wanted to build community of parliament that really support each other, learn each other. But as I said, it's not an act of altruism supporting other parliament. Is a recognition that knowledge and experience, it's built out of sharing with people that are different from you, and exposing your view to other environment. So the private sector, I've seen that that parliament are very similar, and there are quite a number of companies that do exploit this. I think parliament may see also themselves an opportunity to work together. So the next level, a possible next level that I'm proposing here, it might sound too sweet to be true, but it will be better and for all. So at the level of semantic technology, a common standard for parliamentary legislative documents, because it is good, period. I don't think there could be, but maybe you have, any reasonable objection that a common standard for parliamentary and legislative document, notwithstanding the difficulty, the challenges, and the time that we may require to develop, and it may require to adopt. And I'm not talking about that. But if it was possible and if it was feasible, it would definitely be a good thing. And an open source development model, because sharing both expertise and experience and build together will deliver better and wider and collaboration and sharing for all parliament and not just for some. I would like you to appreciate that, I'm not making a sermon and asking you to be good and nice and kind. I think this is honestly a smart way to move forward, a smart way to move forward that deliver better services to you. Because unless this approach is going to deliver better services to you, it would never make sense for you to adopt. Because that's it goes without saying. We may be generous, but never masochist. So, but usually when you present this, you are confronted with some kind of objection. The first one is parliaments are unique. And what I really found in 8 or 9 years, let's forget how many years that I'm dealing with parliament, is what is really unique to the parliament is that they keep thinking themselves as unique. That is unique about parliament. Whenever you meet a parliament, say, no, but we are different. That, I would say, that is the only uniqueness about parliament, thinking themselves as unique, even if they are not. But, so, to me, parliament are unique only in that, on this kind of stubborn belief that they are unique, and if only they come down to admit, no, maybe, yes, we have some different procedures, whatever, but, after all, we have a plenary, we have committee, we have MP, people make proposal, they are debated, they go back and forth. Is it only us that do that? There is nobody else in the world that does that. Yeah, maybe it's true, but I find it really difficult. As I say, it is also true that there is one parliament in a country, but there are many parliament-like institutions in a country. A municipality, if you see it from an information system point of view, have a plenary, have committee, and they debate more or less in the same way. There is a back and forth kind of flow of information. Amendment of document, you cannot really invent many ways to do it. So there are many parliamentary-like institutions in a country. And again, the private sector have seen this, and the private sector is exploiting this. So I'm not saying that parliament are all the same. There are different procedures, there are different traditions. There are many differences, but they are not substantial. And even if there are differences, say, if we differ for 10%, we should not prevent us to build on the common 90%. So the argument of parliament that are unique, I don't think it is on solid ground. Then say parliaments are conservative. Parliament, they don't want, our tradition, they don't want to change. But we have all seen, how many MP do you have that you use in Twitter, even here that you were saying, that you embrace tablet, even if having something that you keep touching in front of you is not something that is, I would consider traditional. So and then what I always say, that traditionally change. Thinking that tradition don't change is going against history. Tradition are set and change continuously. What I think is harder to change is the mindset of what we can call the parliamentary tribes and the gatekeepers in parliament. The one that say, we have been doing amendment, putting 2 red lines when you want to substitute the word that precede. We put 3 black lines when we want to insert a word after 3 words we want to mark up. Honestly, I would challenge these people and say, okay, you take me to your parliament, you leave the room, and I will explain to the MP. But do you want see the amendment like this, that it takes me 20 minutes to explain to you what they are? Or do you want to see amendments that are not in the context? So that when they say change 20 with 19, what are they changing? Do you know what they're changing? Or you just show a document in track change and say, oh, do you want to see amendment like this? I really challenge the parliament and say that they don't want to change to see if MP will say, no, we don't want to see it like this. We don't want to see in a way that is possible to comprehend. It is true, I have to say anyhow, that in the political debate, amendments are also a way to sneak in things that they may not want to be to be seen. So the old way may facilitate this, because it is different. But I really find difficult to believe that there is such a resistance. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, let's try to be part of the solution and not to be part of the problem. There is nothing wrong in changing. There is nothing wrong in evolving. The last objection that usually people make is ideal but not real. Yes, good talk, but where is the walk? This thing cannot happen. Something common sounds really popular and not chic. Sharing even less. And so, and then we are human beings, we are not able to do that, so it's going to fail. you know, that could be true. That could definitely be true. But I think that I was listening once a talk, and he was saying that if there is a unique feature that may distinguish mankind from animal kind, is to imagine the impossible and still want to realize it. And I think even here, it is something I did. It may be ideal, it may not be real, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. After all, progress wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have tried the impossible. If, you know, people have been burned in the past for trying to change our mindset, or say the truth, or say what is not common. I would say then that is ideal, but is happening. It may not be real, but is ideal, but is happening. So we have a Commentoso. It's not just us, whatever, and then there is Bungeni. But let me go on. Open source in Parliament is even here in this room. We have the Parliament of Brazil that has been engaged in open source for years and years. He has been using an open source platform for years. I cannot see them here. Yes. And I've done this morning at 5 o'clock, so I may have done something wrong, but Interleges, I think, is called the portal that you were giving to the different states for publishing legislation. And we are currently collaborating with the Senate of Brazil to see they have tools that they also develop for amendment and for how we can collaborate. We have discussion with the Parliament, European Parliament, that may there could be an intention to open source some of their tools, and we have seen even yesterday the Italian Senate providing as an open source their e-book publishing tool. So there are beginning, and I'm sure that there are many other experiences that I'm not aware. And here we see different civil society organizations, and all of them develop open source tools. So it is something that is here. Let me just, for closing, also remind something about the common standard. Common standard is not something that Flavio or Monica and Fabio came up with. It is a long, it has been there for years. As I said, we can say that the idea was born in the year 2000 when the European Parliament, that was already exposed with the diversity of tradition, languages, and how to better exchange information and how to better use tools, came up with a call for proposal for what was named their ML, a common vocabulary for parliamentary language, development of a markup language for parliamentary text and information. And as you can see, I just present here a short extract of that call. Is say, or agree on a common structure, an information architecture, or at least, and this is what we have picked up, a common vocabulary that can describe the structures, using similar building blocks to allow greater integration and exchange. I think it was a kind of manifesto that we all would agree even now, but it died actually. In 2003, that idea failed mainly by starvation. It was led by some, as Claudio, that is in the European Parliament, knows. You know, a big organization like that kills probably 10 good ideas every day, and while approving 15. But at the same time, the new people keep trying and trying and trying again. Eventually, Claudio succeeded. And I think, but we all have to acknowledge that, we are building on the shoulder of the past, and we should honor the fallen that have contributed to that. When we began the project in 2004, as I said, we really took the seeds from Parla XML. In 2005, we had the first version of the what was then called Pan-Africa Parliamentary Interoperability Framework Initiative. And since Parliament, African Parliament, at those time I think there was 30 or more Parliament, 2005, they appreciated the idea, and they suggested that, it was a good initiative, good enough to deserve an African name, actually. And actually, now that I see Ravi from the Parliament of South Africa was actually the then chief of the IT department of the Parliament of South Africa that brought about the idea. Unfortunately, he's not. He has gone, not from the Parliament, but from Earth. But so that's why then we decided to. It has been decided, proposed to call a Komantoso. That, as you know, means linked heart, he has a symbol, and so on and so forth. And this is one of the reasons why, despite many smiles and many objections and many criticism to say, how can we dare to propose a standard with an African name, we still have it. And I say that people that think like that, how can you dare asking to change the name to something else. In 2008, in 2007 actually, another contribution from Brazil, João Alberto Oliveira de Lima, that is actually was doing a PhD work, and he came up with a proposal for adapting what is an IFLA standard. And actually, an IFLA standard, a standard supported by the Library of Congress that we have very much here close by, to model legal norms. Fabio will probably explain to this, but it was a smart idea that a Komantoso included. To make a long story short, 2011, we have the release 2.0 of a Komantoso that it's influenced also by the requirement and need a multilingual kind of support at the European Parliament. And as you heard yesterday, in February 2012, there is a technical committee that's been formed to open up the process of standardization of a Komantoso. So it's not an idea that I dreamt in a sleepless night, but it was a need that was seen already in 2000, but unfortunately, it was not felt. It was seen, but not felt by Parliament. Now, I hope that the need is not only seen, but is also felt by Parliament. So that is basically the juice of the presentation. The next level could be a common and open standard in an open source development model for developing application. Or it could be just even begin the process. This is a process. Nobody has to jump into anything, but at least see that ideally, and if it's possible, and considering all the constraints that each of you has to deal with, and financial, organizational, and whatever, but that shouldn't prevent you to see far enough to move toward these two goals. So a new level for a better and wider deployment of ICT for all Parliament and not just some. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Flavio. Certainly there was nothing controversial in that presentation. What I'd like to do is maybe take some of the topics that you identified. I really do compliment you on your belief and your passion in what you're presenting. Let's take just the thought of common standards and talk about it a little bit, okay? And I'll start out from kind of our perspective. I think it's a great idea. I think if we were just starting out and we were looking at a way to do something, that identifying a common standard would be, hey, let's do it this way because we really have no investment in what we've already done. So I was very pleased towards the end when you kind of said, you know, how can we begin the process? How can we move in this direction? Because I really think that this is maybe a direction we want to get to, but all of us are going to travel a different path. And so for us, it's a balance. There certainly are some constraints. So we're trying to make progress now in the areas of putting more documents out there, making things more available. So, but we have pretty much an infrastructure that's established in the way we do things. And in order to go to a common standard, we obviously would have to change. And that would not be a small change. That would be a radical change. And so the thought would be, where is it that, what are the items that we could pick off? I'm a believer in take something small and make it successful, because then I think it can grow more because people see what it is that you've accomplished with that small success. So what are maybe some areas that we could agree to at a high level that we could look at as more developed parliaments and say, you know, this is something that maybe we could take a shot at, where we're not totally changing the way we do everything, but is there something that we could make a small success and have an idea that hey, you know, well, maybe this will work. Maybe we can then pick off something else. So just a thought. Let's see maybe what kind of comments we have. Spencer, please.
Yeah, hi, Spencer Tickner from the BC government. I was speaking to Flavio about this, and I've noticed that a lot of the jurisdictions here, as you say, already have their own customized XML standards, and maybe one of the low-hanging fruit can be, as instead of changing fundamentally the system from the back end up, having an output as a connotoso at the final end through a style sheet, through a transformation of some kind. That might be an easy way to kind of make that shift in the direction of a connotoso, for now at least.
Thank you. Anybody else? Reynold.
Good morning. I'm Reynold Schweikart from the Committee on House Administration in the House. Two observations. The House started this process in 97, 98, and the Data Standards Conference we had a few weeks ago, one of the panels started to look at the question of how do we need to extend or change or modify the XML we have given its age for the problem set that people may be trying to solve today. One of our challenges, or one of our just facts of life, is our XML standard is negotiated between the House and the Senate, and sometimes that seems enough of an effort to get consensus. But I think that this process and this direction is worthwhile, and I think about where in the value chain are we talking about standardization? Talking about drafting tools? Are we talking about presentation? Are we talking about analytics? Are we talking about being able to link data sets in some form or fashion? Able to use unique identifiers and so on. So I think there's some different slices that we certainly can look at in our own situation to participate in this process.
Elena.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Zeni, because I heard exactly what I think and what yesterday I didn't have the time and also the courage to say. Because I completely agree that we have to go behind the concept of simple common document and open document. We have to go toward a common conceptuality of what we do. We have to do more work in a semantic context. I completely agree also in regarding the use of open source system, because the world go toward open source system. So we as Parliament, as an institution, have the we must go in this direction. I think also that we must be less self-referential. As a Parliament, we tend to be self-referential. We think that we are unique and we only do something and we do better than the other and so on. But often it is not true. And I think that in situation like this, in meeting like this, we don't have to comparize what we do, but we need more meeting to do together, because it's true, we are all Parliament and we do more or less the same thing. So why do the same thing in different way? We are going, and we are in a society of empathy. So let's do together, and let's do together also in the road and in the pattern of semantic. For example, when I start my project toward a semantic web, the first thing I have done is to find out what the other parliament do in this camp. I found an experience in Finland, an experience in United Kingdom, but we really feel the need to have the more occasion to do together, because if we do together, we spend less and do the thing better.
Thank you. Jim?
You described a little bit about the difficulties getting European parliaments and others to adopt this. But my question is there something special about the United States that makes it even more difficult here to get this type of mindset that you've described going? I'm specifically thinking about the American states. I know that NCSL has been aware of what you're doing for a number of years. Now that the comparable folks are very much aware, but they seem to not embrace this culturally the way I think many European parliaments have. I mean, you look at states like California, Texas, and New York, which are much bigger than many of the European states, and they're so hidebound, it's unbelievable. They may have glossy, beautiful websites, new interfaces, but the vision that you've articulated, there seems to be more resistance, and maybe there's some special democratic dysfunction now in the United States or something like that. I don't know what it is, but there just seems to be much more head in the sands type of thinking, even though we pride ourselves on innovation in the United States, and I think the folks are aware of this, but they're just not making headway the way I think are taking it seriously in a way that the Europeans appear to be. So anyway, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Tom, you had your hand up? Tom, you had your hand up, I'm sorry? Did you have a comment?
Yes, I was going to remark that for me, the virtue of interoperability goes beyond economies of scale and economies of cost that have been discussed so far, and into interoperation of data. So my mind very quickly goes to things like how do we answer questions across borders? If I am staring at statute X in the United States and I want to know what the comparable Canadian statute is, can I retrieve that? We're starting to do a little work in this area, organizing stuff around UNSPSC product codes, for example, mostly with regulatory stuff. But the question is, how do we factor in each other's data in routine activities that actually do make applications across borders? At the moment, what we seem to have on the semantic web much of the time is an environment where it seems to be a market with a lot of sellers and no buyers. There are many triple stores sitting there, and there are not a lot of things consuming the data that's in them. The question for me is, how can we think about those applications that operate across jurisdictions?
Just to come back to the question, what will be a good idea today to start something together? I think, and just to comment why the United States of other, they are not adopting open standard, because we have a lot of other things already in place, and it's really very complex to bring people to agree. And the bigger the institution is, the more complex it is. I think that there is a problem that we're going to share soon. Either you call social networking, social media, engagement of citizens with parliament. We discussed about it a couple of days ago, the risk that we are opening, and the more you open, then you can be bombarded with load of data. I think there is a place that we can work together to create a standard of how citizens submit questions or submit briefs to parliament. That will be, I think all the parliament will be very similar, if not the same. And I think because of the globalization of the question, there is a place for something basic to start with, to see how can we learn from either. And I think the standard, we're speaking about standard and sharing. I've seen three concepts that in my mind, very different, okay? Sharing, open standards, and open source. And I think they are very different, one from the other, and they have very different challenges. And sharing is the easiest one. And in the context of technology, sharing is not necessarily sharing software. I think sharing best practices, sharing patterns, sharing problem resolutions are much easier to do, and we can start doing it right now. Sharing technology, I think, yes, we can inspire each other, but it's not necessarily easy to do because every parliament is different. Then that's the idea. Thank you.
Daniel.
One of the interesting aspects of XBRL, which is the extensible business reporting language, is that no one thought in the financial system they could figure this out, and they came up with an extensible business reporting language where, for example, in the SEC here in the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they have an open sense of it where companies can submit filings where each company comes up with their own variation, or each industry can come up with their own variation. But the FDIC, which deals with the banking, which has much more rigid rules, has their form of XBRL that no bank can change because they need to keep that. So that experience, I think, is something to look at. In the medical field with HL7, the standard for medical information, doctors all across the world talk about the same diseases. It's an industry to think about it. I think we are not in the same space. We have something where each government works very different. The body of law, civil code, common law, all of these things are very different. The way the structures are, the history builds into it, and we each have our own institutions. It's not an industry. So it's one of the things that I worked on 12 years ago was the idea of at least exchanging metadata or standardizing on the metadata. And whether it's, that's one way to think about it, but another way to think about it is maybe we do start thinking about parliaments as sort of an industry. And the civil, I think your comment about social media and the ability for citizens to participate, citizens probably don't know as much about the internal workings of parliaments, and maybe by standardizing we can help them participate more fully. And when we talk about transparency, how can you be fully transparent if the people, even if they get all the information, have no idea how you really work? So, just some thoughts.
Thank you, Daniel. I think just a comment on what Daniel said. It's interesting how the financial industry, they work to how they can exchange data in a common format, but not really change their internal systems. And I have a lot of experience having worked in the insurance industry for quite a while, and they have done the same thing. It's, all right, Blue Cross and Blue Shield isn't going to change all the things that they do internally, and neither is a Metropolitan or any of these other big companies. But what they did agree to do is work together to find a common way that they could exchange claims payment information or claims information so that other people could see what was happening in each. So it's just another interesting way to think about it. Grant.
Grant Vergatini, Essential in California. A few things I wanted to just bring up. The first issue was the issue about the states. I can speak to California specifically. In the past, I would say, yes, the states generally have been very isolated and closed to ideas that would be on a national, even international space. But we did brief the Chief Deputy of California for the Legislative Council a few weeks ago. She's currently reading Monica and Fabio's book. We actually gave her a copy to read, and she was very open to the ideas of a Comontoso. So things are changing, and I'd say it's a recent phenomenon, specifically in California, but I think maybe elsewhere as well. So I think there is quite a bit of promise on that in that space. The other issue was on one of the first steps that could be taken. There was another transparency conference a few weeks ago, and in that conference, Sarah asked a question about a Comontoso and about whether the federal government had taken a look at it. And I think that the answer was kind of not really, but part of the answer was mention of a set of XML files that have been published quietly up on house.gov. And they're using a schema, I believe, designed by Tim Arnold Moore. And I figured, why not give it a try? And so I spent a few days, just 4 days, transforming that into a Comontoso. And if you've got one well-designed XML schema, it's pretty easy to get to another one through the magic of transforms. So it simply providing that output would be an easy first step. The mapping from the schema that's out there right now to a Comontoso is very, very straightforward. What I did is by no means complete. It's 4 days effort. But it does show what you can do and the different formats that could be provided. And if anyone's interested, it's at legix.info. And that's where I share what we learn, the mistakes we learn, the good things we learn. We try and be transparent in what we learn. So if you're interested.
Thank you, Grant. I think, Sylvia, did you have your hand up?
I totally agree with what Bob Reeves said about that's a different situation, the ones that are beginning, that the ones that have everything developed already or lots of work done with XML. The ones that are beginning, it's very easy to begin with all the standards, so what we're trying to be standards. But the other ones have problems. So the point is that from the strategical point of view, I think we are forgetting, speaking about costs and the interest of the state, just getting, just using what the universities do. Because the parliaments, I mean, we have lots of things to do, but our specialty is not knowledge. So the universities can help us very much. So it's a strategical point of view, a view of the state. So we are trying to do this with in our case, and also with Bologna University, but also in our state, and put students to study this and study informatica jurídica. I mean, well, I don't know the words in English. I mean, informatica jurídica, juridical, informatic, I don't know. And so, I mean, that could be wonderful that could be a good strategy, so everybody goes in the same way. And I believe that in the universities, in the good universities, American people have, if they get this and they put together, and they may help parliaments also, because parliaments have to do the work and very quickly, but the university can get the strategy and think about how to reach in the standard, help them to be able to continue the work, but also reaching the standards, investigating, studying, so to be able to do both things. I don't know if I can transmit the idea, but Parliament is working all day long upon getting those things done, but universities thinking another thing. So they can get together, think about it, get the schemas, study them, collaborate together, and they can give the ideas to the countries that are already have done lots of work to how can they convert schemas and be able to go to standards. I don't know if the idea is, but it's a strategical point of view of what I'm meaning. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Grant, what he had said is very similar to what you said about him being able to transform things into a Comitoso format from, I guess, our website. So I guess it's possible, right? Anyone else?
Yes, good morning. My name is Avinash Bika from the Global Center for ICT. What I haven't heard in the past, that is in the past discussions, that is the point about legislation. What I do know, that's for the XBRL case, is that that there was legislation in place, right? That led to it. And I also think that if you look at the case of IPACs, there was a need that was at the supranational, that was at the European level. But my question is, where is the legislation, for example, in the US on this, that there should be open standards, so that you can have interoperability. There is only legislation between states, because I think that if you don't have the legislation in place, that there's nothing going to take place. And so that's a question that I have, and I don't know what is the status of the legislation, for example, here in the US. But I do think that at a global level, that is more challenging, of course. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I might ask Reynold for some help on that one. I'm not as up on what he was talking about, whether there was, are you aware of any legislation that I guess would provide direction towards open source and open standards? Certainly, we've talked about the current administration's letter that is pushing towards XML type formats and sharing of more documentation. Are you aware of anything, Reynold, at all that?
There's one bill pending in the House to deal with reports from the executive branch due Congress and define online posting standards and some technical requirements. There's been some discussions about a project called Golden Spike that's had discussion back and forth to try to impose an XML schema on the federal budget process starting with the President's budget to the appropriations process, to the Treasury Department, to the execution of that budget in the individual departments, but I'm not aware of other legislation besides those two.
Thank you, Reynold. Daniel?
So there are a couple of bills in the works, or bills that have been enacted that deal with pieces of this. So 3 or 4 years ago, there was an appropriations bill that, there was an appropriations bill that required all the ledge branch agencies to create a bulk data task force that was supposed to look at these issues. And it was expected to report back within a year. And at least as far as we can tell, nothing has happened along those lines. But there's already an existing requirement to meet among members within the Library of Congress, the Government Printing Office, the Clerk's Office, and other folks to try to do this. And it's basically stalled out, as far as we can tell, largely due to resistance from the library side. There's also, there was legislation in the last Congress, and will likely come back in this Congress, to require bulk access to all of the underlying Thomas data. And I'm sure that will be back this Congress. There's also something called the Public Online Information Act that was introduced in the last Congress. It's in this one as well. It's in the House and the Senate. It would create a, it's not a standards body, but it's basically a coordinating body of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches to look at these kinds of questions. And it would also empower a person within the executive branch to make standards for the executive side of all these kinds of things. So there are a couple of either there's existing regulations that already require some kind of action that aren't necessarily being adhered to, and there's a couple of bills that would help promulgate the types of standards, would result in entities that would help either promulgate or identify or find or converse about the kinds of standards that you're asking about.
Sarah?
Thank you. Sarah Schott from Knowledge is Power. I think to speak a little bit to the open source and sharing of tools part of the conversation, I think what we may view as radical may seem so because many of our governments have delayed fully modernizing or retooling their systems for so long. In research that we did at Knowledge is Power of dozens of governments across both the United States, Canada, and abroad, we found that many governments, on average, hadn't updated the bulk of their tools for over 15 years. Or they had updated very small pieces. In fact, some of the legislative IT staff we talked to couldn't remember when they had a last major change in their drafting tools. And so what we found was that governments were actually quite hungry for new drafting software, new ways to publish. But of course, they're risk averse, and they needed examples out there of what others were doing. And when they had looked around at tools, it had just been so cost prohibitive that they couldn't imagine purchasing it. So staying with Word, their copy of Word of 97, seemed like the best plan, given the uncertainty. And I could fully understand that. And yet they were met with so many challenges. And so I think that there are a number of governments out there that would be receptive to seeing new tools or considering open source. Certainly there's many governments that have included open source tools in their ability to apply or be considered in their RFP processes. But I think in particular governments need the financial cost saving argument. They need some examples. They need some data around that so they can make the argument to make an upfront investment, even if they're leveraging open source tools. They need training, and they need models to follow. So whatever pilot programs, whatever projects and collaboration we come out of here need to be very well documented for them so that they're able to follow. And it seemed that in our research that open source tools would be very welcome, especially if they were within some kind of government partnership that had some service and support tied to it. And they also needed policy examples for implementation. Many of the governments, their current open data policies do not cover open document work. And in fact, I found some governments that exempted documents from their data.gov sites. Thank you.
Jeff?
Just to introduce what may be perceived as a slightly contrary view, but even though I'm supportive of all that's been said before, I think when we talk about exchange and interoperability and sharing, we do have to ask for what purpose and what drives it. Reynolds cited the challenge the House and Senate of the United States Congress had found many years ago in trying to develop a common DTD. And the differences were not just we're unique, but there were somewhat profound differences in the way in which they took care of legislation, the way in which they approached the legislative process. It didn't have to do with how you underlined a change or how you did a strikeout. It had to do with how you operated. And so the business rules had to be reflected in the DTD. So the compromise, which has been effective in the end, was that they wrote another DTD to exchange information. So they leave each other alone in the preparation of the documents, which I think is a sound practice, but arrange to exchange information so that it can be used for other purposes. But just to get back to a point Tom raised earlier about the value of having access to documents in XML perhaps from states or other countries so that you can locate information about how that state is handling a particular issue, either legislatively or through regulation. I would ask whether the preferred solution is some sort of sharing of XML documents, or whether the solution to that is having an effective search system that somebody can use to find the information they're looking for, regardless of the underlying infrastructure. And when you're talking particularly about global issues, I would suggest that the challenge of translation and differences in the native language far exceed the differences and the challenges inherent in the standards for tagging the document.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, sir.
Just to briefly talk about that point directly. If you're talking about tagging schemes, of course you're talking about methodologies for making the infrastructure that allows communication to happen. It doesn't make the communication happen. Nevertheless, you have to have that infrastructure in place if you're going to have the communication. So when you're talking about a comantoso, you can have legislation originally composed using tags like a comantoso. You can use perhaps a comantoso as middleware where it would not be practical to start with it. But at some point, if you're going to exchange information or to be able to compare the information, you have to have those similar tags to do that translation. Beyond that, of course, you do need to do the very hard work of then doing the comparison and, then implementing something like Eurovoc in your legislation as part of your tags is something that's necessary and is expensive, hard work that unfortunately we haven't talked perhaps enough about today or through this whole conference. But you have to start with the infrastructure. And so you really can't stress that too much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Joan.
Flavio, thank you for that presentation. It was really thought-provoking, and I've been sitting here thinking, so why don't we do this? Why don't we engage with the open standards and the open source? And I've come up with 2 reasons, really, why we don't do it enough. We engage when you present yourself in front of us. When we see you, we get engaged and we think, what a good idea. And then we go back to our parliament and the day job comes in. So I think my recommendation would be that you are more visible. And I've just been doing a Google search on Parliament open source. And I think the Global Centre came 7th on the list, below a lot of providers. Did a Google search on Parliament open standards, and you came 2nd on the list. It must be quite current and must be quite up there. But it is something about visibility of the solutions you could offer to parliaments, I think, on a consistent basis. And that may be in, we are ICT people. Maybe in an electronic format, we could have a forum where we could share these ideas and case studies. And I do think it's about case studies. And I sit in a parliament that has loads of legacy systems. To move from where we are, which is probably about 80% dependent on Microsoft, to move out of that position is a massive task. So finding our way out in little bits, if we can be shown how to do that, or there are examples of how to do that, I think we would take up the proposals here. But otherwise, I think it is the day job that gets in the way and tracks us off course into other directions.
Thank you, Joan. Daniel?
I just want to say, Joan, that I think that is fantastic. And we should do that not just for these case studies and electronic ideas, but also, even though it's not necessarily going to work as well from country to country, looking at some of the draft laws and things along those lines, things that are looking at legal frameworks, some of the conceptual ideas behind how to approach this as well. We've seen significant diffusion of some of these ideas, whether they're open data principles throughout the world, something that we worked on in California and the U.S., we've seen adopted in the country of Georgia, and we've seen adopted in several states, and we've seen adopted legislatively in South America. And there are many useful both conceptual pieces and actual legislative pieces, which, although needing to be adapted significantly for different contexts, still could be very useful for all of us to exchange. And I really like the idea of having some sort of an information exchange to do that. So,
thank you, Daniel. We got about 5 minutes left, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it back over to Flavio. He's been patiently listening to our comments and questions and concerns, and let him finish up the session. Flavio?
Thank you. I will try to I cannot, some of, there was no question, so there cannot be response, but there are a few points that I may try to address. First, about Jim was saying, how come New York, why come California doesn't use it, or whatever. Europe, there may be more likely. I don't think we can say that Europe it's more likely and the US is less likely. What I was saying, that there are some what we can call illegitimate concern. One was, it's something coming from Africa, it cannot be good, and it is easily disregarded. You wouldn't. There is this bias, and then there is, of course, interest. There is legacy interest, and NES, National Council for State Legislatures. There is a lot of interest that going on there, and it's really, I think, difficult water to navigate. But there was also legitimate concern that I think now with Acomantoso in Oasis we are trying to address. You shouldn't really, it's not so wise to invest in a standard that is not actually a standard, that he hasn't really, we have documentation, we keep working on documentation, but we have to do much better that work. And now that we are in Oasis, I think we can do, and so on and so forth. So there were some not legitimate, but there were also legitimate concern that I think we have to address. I want to go on this train of thoughts and talk a bit about Tom Bruce but all the other professor, let's say the academia that is here. Unfortunately, academia, they are a little bit like all human beings. They may be smart, but they are human beings. So unless you think something is not good, and this is, Fabio, Monica will look at me and say, no, it's not true, whatever. But there is this attitude. And when, in fact, I think it is really important that we involve the wider sector of academia. There are bright minds everywhere. And again, bringing a Comantoso to OASIS is giving the possibility to everybody to play their own card and to play them publicly and to subject to the peers as review. And so I really hope that the university, the professors that are here, will take a keen interest in participating in the work of the standard. As Monica said, we will try our best beside the mechanism that are foreseen by OASIS. And since, as you saw, there is the obstacle also, the payment that one institution has to do to become part, and then several members can be, but you have to be. We will try to build new venue collaboration, because it is very vital for a standard to have a wide pool of expertise on people thinking and people supporting Parliament. That is very critical. So that is an appeal that I will really make to all. And as you know, people like you, because Jeff, yes, Google is search, is magic, is whatever, but I think that Tom was referring to what is representing representing the ontology, the structure, the thoughts in document. And that is a conceptualization that has to take place. Google makes me smart, but it cannot. They can try to do it, and probably they are trying to do it. But it is the representation of knowledge that is something that university, in the legal domain, how to represent knowledge and fact and whatever in the legal domain, that has to be sedimented. I think now a Comantoso, new houses is in California. Probably, it will not miss the heat of Africa, and so it will pick up a different accent. But that's that's the way it goes. And I think we are happy that this is going to happen, and we hope that you also participate. The other briefly two thoughts that has a grant demonstrated, or even as you said. Adopting a standard doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change your whole entire system. It could be a different end product, and then because it might be too complicated, it might be not even worthwhile to change all the value chain that you already build in your system and it works. But it could be relatively inexpensive and easy to take the outcome that you got and provide it also in a different format. So without disrupting your working procedure, without throwing at the sea or in the river here your system, but just building on them. One last thing is that I have seen many of you mention to share information, to share case study, and so on and so forth. I think that is very good. It is very valuable, and I think Gerardo and the Global Center and what we can contribute, we will definitely do. We all have a public document, but I would like to stress that from the experience that I had, if you want to really have a group, you have to work together. We have to find activity to work together, because otherwise the sharing or whatever, it has a peak, it's easy to pick up, it's really to reach a level, and then it somehow dies out. And I think, as Erin and others said, there is really actually need to work together, and we could identify the activity because you develop relationship. We are human beings, and so we at least me, we like to work together. So thank you very much. I think I'm finished on time. No, most.
Pretty good. Thank you, Flavio. It's time for a break. We're going to come back at 11 o'clock. There should be some refreshments in the break room. Thank you.
Welcome back to the session. We are already 9 minutes behind schedule, so it's a short session of 1 hour, so we have to start, even if some participants are still enjoying their coffee. Let me just say that we will have two parts in these sessions, I would say. One is the status, more on the status and project developments for open document standards in legislatures, and we will also hear in the same session two co-rapporteurs who will frame their views in this session, taking into consideration what happened in the last two days and few hours. Without further delay, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Fabio Vitali, Associate Professor, Department of Computer Science of the University of Bologna, for his presentation. Thank you. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I feel somehow embarrassed in starting to talk about a subject that has been discussed quite frequently in the last 2 days, and I was trying to find an angle that could still be interesting even after the discussion that we had in the first session with after Flavio's talk about the attitudes that individual parliaments and organizations could have towards the adoption of a common format. And I come from a specific background that has been dealing with data format for the last 20 years. And in this period, I've had several chances to make experiences and to learn lessons. And so maybe I will try to propose just a few reflections. Maybe probably it's too late already, for your mind has been already set, but maybe these reflections could at least clarify in my mind what I've been working on. One of the issues that hasn't been discussed very much, I think, is to what purpose data format should be thought for. And my claim here is that the amount of information that you want to push inside the document is the key to understand how and what is the best approach to the data format. And XML, in that sense, is just one of the possible syntaxes, but the whole point is that the more information you put in the document, and the better it is. I'll be very clear very soon now. So I have a background starting with actually my PhD with Monica at the early 90s, but what I would like to point out is that there are at least 4 different projects I was involved in, going from private publishers to public administrations, both national and with a huge international slant that allowed me to discuss and see the needs that are arising from many different sources. So one of the things that to me is very important is that a data format that is focusing only on one type of use or one type of user is somehow probably optimized for that, but can hardly be expanded to other needs, to other users. And we have several types of applications that need to be taken care of. We have the needs of the drafting office that needs to create documents and handle the day-to-day routine of having the MPs discuss the document, propose amendments, and so on. And then there is for instance, the offices of the presidency of the parliaments that need to look after the workflow of the bill process and so on, and needs to make sure that everything happens in the right moment and the right time and everything is recorded. And then there is the needs of the citizens that needs to access the legislation, but not only all that, also the parliamentary activities and all the data that affect their understanding of the political process. And finally, there are very specific legislative activities that are important. Consolidation is something that we've been discussing and studied for a long time, and is just one of them. And then there is version comparison, language synchronization, multi-language support, and so on, that are also very important in many contexts. And this discussion always has come to basically three topics. Should we work on specific tools? Should we create a specific software architecture that takes care of all the needs and provides support for all the tasks of our users? Or should we start with a data format? And from my point of view, there is a very clear answer. The data format is the most stable decision you could make. The tools are very much dependent on the technological panorama of the technological era you're living in, and will change probably every 3, 4, 5 years. You will have to redo your tools. And the software architecture are more stable. Well, we are going to create the tools for, I don't know, for the drafting offices. Well, the needs are clear, but at some point the new needs will arise, and you will have to start thinking again at the tasks you're going to support, are the type of application you're going to create. Data format, in that sense, have a much longer lifespan. Again, we talked about that in the last 2 days, about the need to create things that could be easily supported for dozens of years, maybe hundreds of years. And so, what is the best data format? Again, this is, there are many possible options. We have been examining all of them in these 2 days. PDF, HTML5 and RDFA, linked data, or XML. There are many advantages and disadvantages to each one of them. PDF has the nice property of being very close to the original visual aspect of the document, but has, on the other hand, the problem that it doesn't support structure, it doesn't impose any kind of homogeneity in the final result, and so on. HTML is extremely simple, but its simplicity is also what is constraining. It has basically a presentation aspects with little structure and extremely little semantic awareness. RDFA, on the other hand, provides the support for semantics within HTML documents, but in that case, HTML acts as the host of this semantic information. There is no real connection between the content of the HTML and the semantic assertion you're making. And so the connection between the text and the semantics is not given. It's just something that you hope it works. So linked data is good for data, but documents is something slightly different. And of course, whenever you have a specific need with specific users and specific users, it's very easy to look down to other needs and so on. If you just need to manage the workflow of the bill, that's a sub-task of the management of the complete management of the legislative workflow. If you manage published legislation, that's easier than the whole of it. If you manage handsets, it's easy than the whole management of it. So if you have a sub-issue, then you have a simpler case than the whole issue. That's obvious. So from my point of view, I would like to go away from the discussion about the best data format and the best approach and the best architecture and the best tool, and talk about information. In many ways, from a Shannonian point of view, from the point of view of Shannon, the idea that there is a connection between energy and information, and that you have some entropy that you are fighting against or you are being subject to when you're dealing with information. And there are operations that increase the information and reduce the entropy, and there are data formats that allow additional information to be stored. And the nice part, so regardless of what's inside this pyramid, from my point of view, what is interesting to point out is that there are actions that increase the amount of information that you keep with your data. And these are hard, but eventually will give you a very powerful tool. And on the other hand, creating output from that higher energy, higher information input is much easier. So the process has a very steep first step that you can stop at any point, but the more you go on, the more charged with information you have as a result. And then you can create out of that any kind of structured information. So I'm not saying that XML is necessarily the best solution. I'm saying that currently I see it as the data format that allows the highest, the largest quantity of information to be placed in. And if a new data format that allows more information to be stored came around, I'm very much in favor of it. So I don't care about the actual syntax, but the whole point is that we have tried with Akomantoso to create not a syntax for XML, but a way to collect and organize a reasonably large amount of information. And the XML is just the specific syntax, it's just the technicality. You can do actually Akomantoso with PDF and HTML and RDFA. It's harder and it's more involuted, but the whole point is that you could and probably should store a lot of information with your data. So Akomantoso is really a conceptual approach to the management of information associated to parliamentary documents. And I have 4 issues here that I would like to propose that have characterized the development of Akomantoso, and that to me are still important issues to be discussed and handled regardless of what is the actual data format that we're going to use. The first of all is authorship. The second is the distinction between content, structure, semantic, and presentation. I don't have time probably for the conceptualization of documents and files, the FRBR approach that is very important to me, but it's quite complex to go through. And then self-containment as the key aspect of preservation, rather than signatures or specific hardware mechanism for preservation. Self-containment to me is very important. So, authorship. Akomantoso has a very clear policy towards authorship. Everything that is said in an Akomantoso document belongs to someone who says that. So we have data, which is the actual content of the document, whose author is clear, probably the author of the document, and everything else, from the markup to the metadata, is editorial comment that has been created by someone else. So a common total suggests that content is separated, explicitly separated from metadata. Something is created by the legislative body. Anything else has been created by the editorial offices, the drafting office and so on. That needs to be explicitly associated with a name and a version and a date. This allows for multiple, even incompatible metadata collection to accommodate within the same overall conceptual framework. You could have both objective and subjective metadata, debatable and non-debatable metadata associated to the same content. And you could have ontological reorganization and how ontologies, knowledge representations happen on top of these things. So semantic web and approaches and tools should or immediately be available and usable over the documents because the metadata has a very clear ontological interface. Second, content structure, semantics, and presentation to me are very important. The structure is not secondary. The content is the text that has been approved, but the structure is what makes it possible to understand what's going on. And the semantics can be and should be derived from the structure. It is possible. And the presentation is very important, but it's through the structure that the presentation is associated to the content. You have the specific choice, specific typographical choice in the moment in which you know that the structural role of that piece of text, a heading of a section has a specific typographical choice because it's a heading, not because it contains such and such words and so on. So structure is basically the glue that connects the content with the semantics, with the presentation, and can be used for testing and validating the correctness of the generation process of the document. I can see whether someone in the drafting office has made an error because they forgot a piece, because they forgot a number, and so on, because we can test the correctness and completeness of the structure. So we can give up semantics if you only care for publication on paper on screen. We can even give up a structure if you are only interested in the one specific presentation choice, for instance, exactly as it was presented to the MPs or as it was published by the official gazette and so on. And you can even give up content if you only need to trace the document and keep track of it throughout the workflow. But if you need more than this, if you need to do a number of different tasks over your documents, then you probably need all of it. And a common TOZO has a clear specific place for each of these aspects, clearly separated, explicit, and authored. I'm not going to the idea of Ferber. Ferber is a very important conceptual framework that allows us to identify and differentiate the abstract idea of the document from the actual physical files in which it is actually stored. We are dealing with documents rather than files, and this shows throughout for naming, for identification, for version tracking, and so on. And there is a consistent and organized structural model behind the scenes. Self-containment is also particularly important. Self-containment is the point. Self-containment means that everything from content to structure to metadata are placed within the same container, which is the document. And it is important to guarantee preservation of the content and the understanding of the document within across time, in the long term. The idea is that whenever your software architecture evolves and changes, you do not have to redo and transfer a lot of database table relations and so on. You just move over the document that contains everything. You probably should have a specific data extracted and placed in architecture-specific technology-dependent tools such as databases and so on. But the idea of a common TOS is that this should be the temporary information for speed purposes and for efficiency, while the document, abstractly and concretely, is the authoritative container of all the information relevant to the permanent management of these documents. Finally, we have been discussing very little of naming. To me, naming is a very important issue, giving the correct way, a correct mechanism for addressing and referring to documents separately from their physical representation in a specific hard disk of a specific computer of the web. This is extremely important. Legislative documents are more complicated than files. They are not files. They are ideas. You have references. They are not made to files. They are made to a document that changes in time and the reference changes in time with it. Modifications, amendments, and so on are done not to a specific files, but to a specific concept of that may have several different physical representation in physical hard disk. So legislative references are rarely or never made to files. Documents have to be managed separately and differently than files. A naming schema must be created that guarantees completeness, globalness, meaningfulness, memorizability, and guessability. These are the basic requirements for a good naming schema that a common TOS provides. So to conclude, the basic feature of a good standard should be a separation of structured normative content presentation and metadata. There is a meta standard called ChenMetaLex that provides a number of very general but also very important requirements that, from my point of view, should absolutely be followed. Have a strong naming policy and allow for extensions and customization. A common TOS does all of this. So, precise and sophisticated organization of content, structure, semantic, and presentation. A complete metadata model. We haven't discussed, but it's something we can discuss at length about time awareness. Documents change in time, the role of the people involved change in time, the documents evolve themselves, they go through steps of a workflow, they have their own life cycle and so on. The time model of the document is particularly interesting, complicated, and extremely important. And the naming model is also very important. Norm in Rete, a common TOS, and ChenMetaLex all have it, and we started having it from the very beginning because we were aware that these were the most relevant thing in the discussion of our format. Again, the quantity of information you store with the document is the key factor of success. We are continuously inventing new ways to use information. If at some point, for instance, at the very beginning of the workflow of the document, you have somebody that has information about it, and you throw this information away because your data format doesn't allow you to store it, or because you don't see the need for this information, or because your tools do not allow you to specify this information and so on. At some point down the line, maybe not now, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, this information will be needed and will be required to be inserted again. Finally, some advertisement. We have been doing for several years some academic activities. One of them, Monica organizes every year a summer school on legislative informatics in Ravenna in Italy. It's a nice place, the food is good, the weather is usually good in September, and yeah, you have to spend 6 hours a day doing boring stuff, but then you have Ravenna and you have interesting things and so on. And of course, the OASIS Legal DocML technical committee started yesterday, and I think that's also a very important and useful news to know. Thank you.